Welcome to day 6 of the 12 Days of Celtic Myth. Every day there's a story or part of one, and then I try to explain it. Today's session will be a bit shorter than some of the recent ones. I just want to consolidate what we know about Bran, son of Foyle, and just ice that cake a little. And then we'll take a deep breath before moving on to the Welsh King Bran and his story starting tomorrow. When we left Bran yesterday, Manannán had just told him that the land of women he was seeking was within reach. Bran and his crew rowed onward, and soon they came to an island. Circumspectly, they began rowing around it. All the inhabitants ran down to the shore, pointing at Bran's vessel and laughing uproariously, and they would not answer his greetings. Bran sent a man ashore, and then watched in horror as he joined the islanders in pointing and laughing. They turned their vessel and rowed away from that place, which is sometimes called the Island of Joy. Soon, though, they did reach the land of women and were given a welcome by the head woman. She greeted them graciously. "Come ashore, Bran, son of Foyle. Your arrival is welcome." She threw out a ball of string to Bran, and when he caught it, it stuck to the palm of his hand. The woman used the string to pull Bran's boat into port. They were taken to a large house, and in that house was a bed for every couple, 3 times 9, the same as the number of Bran's crew. Dishes of food magically appeared and were magically replenished, and every wished-for food was provided. It seemed they were in that place for a year, but in fact, it was many years. One of Bran's men, Nechtan, son of Colvran, became terribly homesick. In those days, people understood that such homesick was an unbearable burden and a danger to the person suffering it, and the man's relatives among the crew begged Bran to take Nechtan home. The head woman of the Island of the Women said that they would regret that decision, but they decided to go nevertheless. So she told them that they must not go ashore in Ireland. She also told them to stop in the Isle of Joy and collect that man they had left there. And this they did, and they arrived quickly at Bran. There was a great gathering on the shore. A man called out to ask them who they were. "I am Bran, son of Foyle," cried Bran. "You are not known to us," said the man, "but we have an ancient story we call the Voyage of Bran." As they conversed, the homesick man eagerly leapt ashore, but as soon as his feet touched the ground of Ireland, he was as a pile of ash, as though he had been long buried. And then Bran said, "Great folly of Colbran's son to do battle against time. Had Nechtan, Colbran's son, been washed in holy water, he might have been saved." From the safety of his ship, Bran told the story of all his wanderings to those assembled on the shore. He wrote this poem down in Ogham and bade them farewell, but where he went after that is not known. And that is the story of Bran, son of Foyle, and his voyage to the otherworld. If I'm honest, I've never found the ending very satisfying. The fabulous poetry is a hard act to follow. Stripped of its long descriptive passages, the Voyage of Bran is just another story of a man who lost track of time while visiting the good folk, that is, the fairies. As for the poetry itself, I think it lends itself to both Christian and pagan interpretations. From a historical point of view, it makes sense to think that since the poet was probably a Christian, the Christian references are there to urge us to follow the gospel. We are expected to nod piously in agreement with any censure of the old beliefs. We might easily say that much of the description of Manannán's otherworld paradise is a riffing on descriptions of the Christian heaven. Yet if we turn the mirror over and look at the other side, I think it's possible to see another interpretation in which the poet, speaking through Manannán, or maybe the Manannán speaking through the poet, is offering a critique of the new religion with lines like, "We are from the beginning of creation without age, without consummation of earth. Hence we expect not that there should be frailty. The sin has not come to us. Equally, Manannan's ability to beget a son who is simultaneously mortal and immortal on a mortal woman seems to be a bit of a challenge to the specialness of the God of Israel. That may not be seen as the down-to-earth way of looking at this text these days, because it seems to fail to take account of the historical reality of the text's 7th or 8th century origins. To which I can only say these are the origins of the text, but not necessarily of the story it tells. Before we head for Wales and a new King Bran tomorrow, it's worth having a last think about the two stories of Bran, son of Foyle. One question that arose in the live discussions was which story happened first. We need to be careful with this question, as it could be interpreted as which story is older. You see what I mean? But these are two different questions. Let's start with the first question. In the career of Bran, son of Foyle, in mythological time, was his land flooded before he journeyed to the land of women, or after? And James Carney offers us one answer. I've mostly avoided these terms ektre and imrav in these talks, but they're both commonly used to describe stories like these. And since the second story is so well known by the name The Voyage of Bran, Carney and others use ektre for the first one, which is also, of course, a dialogue, you remember, between the druid and the prophetess. The general nostalgic mood of the dialogue implies that Bran is now dead, or at least departed, and that his last act was the ektre. But the imrav was also Bran's last act. In other words, ektre Bran, the first story, and the Voyage of Bran are variants of a single important incident in Bran's life, his adventure and perilous visit to the land of women. So Carney's saying that these are two very different tellings of the same story. One of these tales, it would seem, must have been developed from the other. It will seem, from a number of considerations, including the probable respective dates of the dialogue and the Voyage of Bran, the lack of Christian elements in the former and their predominance in the latter, that the Voyage of Bran has been based on the adventure and not the reverse. So Carney's saying that the text we looked at first in this series, with the druid and the prophetess and the well, is the older story. Scholars who've worked on these texts are still not in total agreement about what century they belong to. This paper is in a book published in 2000, but it's being reprinted here. Carney wrote it in, I think, the 1980s. It was thought for a while that this story was from the 7th century and the Voyage of Bran from the 8th century. But I think, if anything, the first text is now being considered to be also 8th century, thanks to the work of guys like John Carey. So if Carney is correct here, then the development from one story to the other must have happened quite quickly. It could easily be possible that either the tales are from two very different traditions, maybe different poetic schools operating under different masters. It could be that there were earlier versions of both of the texts we have today. Carney also has an interesting theory about why Mongan is in the second story. The strangest feature of the Voyage of Bran is the presence of Mongan, son of Fiachna, who died in 629. He's presented as a son of Manannán mac Lir, the Irish sea god. Manannán himself foresees his begetting in future ages. What to us might seem a blasphemous comparison is made when the conception of Mongan is deliberately juxtaposed with the incarnation, that is, the incarnation of Christ. There is, it seems to me, an explanation to hand that is as obvious as it is daring. Oh, James Carney is going to be daring. That the Voyage of Bran was composed as a commemoration of Mongan in 629, or shortly afterward, making Mongan, a son of Manannán, needs nothing more than a poetic conceit. Now, if you're not used to Celtic texts, then you may struggle to understand how historical people end up interacting with deities in stories. It actually happens quite a lot, so you just have to get used to it. And some of it is as a result of poets or storytellers who may be employed by some noble person wanting to give their patrons' ancestors some good stories. At an intellectual level, I understand that this is the case, but I think that the magical world it creates also says something wonderful about the worldview of the people who told, and I'm sure sometimes believed, these stories. I feel like they contain a kind of truth which is hard to quantify. Both of these stories, in spite of their many differences, do have a similar framework. Bran is called to the other world through a form of magical speech. His druid in the first story, the woman with the silver branch in the second. The world is described as the abode of women who possess great wealth. And there's a situation where water and land are sort of conflated. The plains of Bran's first kingdom end up under water, while Bran and Manannán have differing perceptions about the nature of land and water. John Carey makes the observation that this is also true in the text about Mongan and Columba. He writes, when Columcille asks, whose was it formerly, this loch which we see? The youth replies that it was a prosperous and fertile territory. In both cases, a mortal who sees only water is told by a supernatural informant, that is Mongan or Manannán, of a beautiful country occupying the same space as the water. The final thing to consider are the very different outcomes of the two stories. In the first tale, Bran's kingdom is destroyed and he is presumably killed. In the second, it appears that he's been chosen to live forever in the wonderful land of women. I don't want to start comparing the stories of the Irish Bran and the Welsh Bran today. Let's allow this to settle a bit before we get stuck into our next story tomorrow. Do you agree with James Carney's idea that the voyage of Bran, complete with Manannán mac Lir and Mongan, was composed to honor the real Mongan mac Fiachna? And if not, how would you explain the situation we have with this piece of literature? So that's it for today. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye. Celtic mythology. Where do you begin? How do you keep all those names straight? And how do you pronounce them? So here you are, trying to learn about Celtic mythology. You've tried looking online, but all the answers are different. It's hard to know which information is trustworthy. Maybe you bought a few books, and the result hasn't been as good as you'd hoped. You didn't quite find what you were looking for, and then some know-it-all told you that your books were wrong anyway. Hang in there, help is at hand. But I'll be honest with you, Celtic mythology is a big topic. You can't learn it all from one book or one website. You can't learn it all in a month or even a year. Maybe you're past that beginner stage. You feel like you've found some good resources, but it's still hard to progress. Maybe you've spent a lot of time on one area, a particular set of stories or a deity that you're interested in, but all the names and the jargon are still confusing. You're not sure how one thing relates to another. You've been in the weeds, you've been in the trees, now you need to get organized. I've got a new class starting soon called Introduction to Celtic Mythology. Whether you're an absolute beginner or someone who's been exploring for a while, this should give you a good foundation to build on. My aim is to give people a clear understanding of what Celtic myth actually is, where it comes from, and a good, solid overview of all the ingredients. This is a 12-week course. About half of it is dedicated to material from Wales and half to Ireland. Part of what I'll be teaching is how the different stories and groups of stories are usually organized, so that things are less of a jumble for you. Then we'll learn about what's in some of the most famous or most important stories, who some of the main characters are, and what the story is about. I'll also make sure that you're building up skills so that when the class ends, you're well equipped to do your own further research. Every week, I'll be featuring a book and a website that I find useful, including some tricks for finding what you're actually looking for on the internet. I always send out a PDF of notes after my classes, and you can expect them to be full of useful links. That will include links for further reading or videos, and links to where you can find proper translations of most of the stories. And speaking of stories, I know people want stories. It's why we like mythology, after all. So there will be a bit of storytelling every week, and of course, you'll get a link to where you can read the original text that it came from. This will be a lot to pack into the course, but I will make sure that there's time set aside every week to answer your questions. You don't need any prior knowledge of Celtic myth or Celtic languages for this class. I'll start with the most basic basics, and we'll build from there. By the end, I think you'll be surprised at how much you've learned, and you should have a nice, clear understanding of things. There's more information at the link below this video.